This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This is Sarah, and I just want to take a moment to speak to you about this week's sponsor, Favor. Favor, Inc. is a statewide family-led nonprofit 501c3 organization that is committed to empowering families as advocates and partners in improving educational and health outcomes for our children. Favor is the Connecticut state organization of the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. Favor offers a single place for families with children who have medical, mental, emotional, and behavioral health challenges to find information, assistance, and training. To find out more about Favor, please go to favor-ct.org. We are grateful for our opportunity to work with Favor as a sponsor, and now on to the rest of the episode.
This episode is brought to you by CogniView. CogniView provides cognitive assessment tools to a broad range of healthcare providers for the early detection of cognitive impairment. Early detection allows patients to address modifiable risk factors sooner, potentially changing the course of cognitive decline. It also allows healthcare providers to develop a plan with the patient and caregiver so the patient can live their best life during their journey. For more information, go to www.cognivue.com. That's www.cognivue.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Chronicles. My name is Sarah, and today I'm here with Kristen Beatty. Kristen is a former family caregiver for her dad with Alzheimer's disease. She is also on the board of the Alzheimer's Association, and she's an advocate. Hello, Kristen. How are you today?
Hello, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well, and I'm so pleased to be here with you.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have you on and have you share your story of, your caregiving journey and also talk about the Alzheimer's Association. But first, I'd like you to further introduce yourself to my audience.
Excellent. Well, I've just noticed on all of your podcasts, you have authors and people who started foundations and nurses and people with lots of degrees. I'm none of those things. I work in corporate America and have my entire life, but my passion and my life's work now is finding a cure for Alzheimer's and also supporting the caregiver community that is out there. And so again, I'm really pleased to be on your podcast and talk about the association, because that is truly how I've gotten involved and started probably 12 years ago, and have just never stopped since then. A lot of people have volunteer journeys and they get tired or they get burnt out or life gets in the way, but not for me. Volunteering with the association is, again, my life's work, and my job on the side is making money to support my family. But I'm so thrilled to be here. I live in Denver, Colorado, and have been here for most of my life. And by way of introduction, I can sort of launch into my story in that I'm a military kid, a military brat, and traveled every 2 years, moved every 2 years because my dad was a fighter pilot in the military. In fact, what I tell people is everyone knows Top Gun. That's the Navy version. He went to that same fighter school for the Air Force version, and he flew F-16s, and he flew in Vietnam. So I just want to give people a sense of this guy was larger than life, before he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So that is a little bit about my background, but I'm happy to start sharing my story unless you had another question.
No, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm grateful for your father for his service. My father-in-law is also an Air Force veteran. So I did not grow up in the military brat lifestyle, but my father-in-law was retired Air Force by the time my husband came along, but his siblings did, and they're all actually Air Force. My brother-in-law, actually all three of my brother-in-laws are all former Air Force veterans also.
That's fantastic.
So an interesting thing we have in common, and again, I'm grateful for your dad's service and your service that you were just brought into as a military brat. So thank you for that and for sharing that. Would you like to talk about how your caregiver journey started?
Yes, absolutely. I'll try and make it short because it was a very long journey. My dad had it for over 12 years. He was a slow burn. A lot of people get diagnosed and it goes quickly, but that was not the case for my dad. So we didn't even know. So again, a military family, don't ask, don't tell. My dad did not want anyone to know he had a quote unquote weakness, and my mother fronted everything for him. So we saw a little bit of memory loss, a little bit of agitation, but she was so good at fronting everything that we had no idea anything was wrong. And in fact, we were watching television and there was a segment on the news about Alzheimer's. And my mom said, "Hey, there's your dad's Alzheimer's specialist." And I went, "Excuse me?" And that is literally how I found out that he had it, because she didn't want anyone to know and he didn't want anyone to know. And he was highly functioning in the beginning. I think that's the hard thing for people when the diagnosis happens or doesn't happen, is you can't actually tell. He was administering his own medications. He was still driving. He was paying bills. He was doing all of those things. But unbeknownst to us, my mother was really his support system. And so my brother and I it's just the two of us. And when it really came to a head was my mother died of a heart attack in 2012, and we had no warning. It was sudden and tragic for all of us. But the worst part was that she left him behind, and we did not realize the magnitude of how far gone he was. And so also in that, we didn't know what doctors he was seeing, what medications he was taking, what, his life insurance policy was, and all of those things. So I've heard that on some of your podcasts, but that is the absolute first thing I tell everyone is, if you have any indication of ill health in your parents, is get them to sit down, no matter how morbid it seems, and give you everything they possibly have about healthcare, legal things, all of their paperwork, and even know where the passwords are to their computers so that you can get into their accounts, because that was sort of where my brother and I were left in the lurch and just picking everything up and trying to care for my dad. And so we really did see more paranoia than anything, and suspicion of other people than memory loss, but he certainly had that too, and serious agitation. And so that's really how our journey began, was with the death of my mother. And so in addition to my mission around finding a cure for Alzheimer's and doing things in the name of my father, I do more things in the name of my mother and caregivers, and making sure that they are getting the help that they need. And so that's sort of my next lesson is, and I'm sure you hear this from everyone, is force the issue. We let my mom just do what she wanted to do. She didn't get any help. She didn't have any support groups and all of the things that the Alzheimer's Association offers. She didn't take advantage of any of it. And we really think that the stress ended her life early, because she was managing almost all of it on her own, because she didn't want her children to worry. So, that's really where our journey started.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you made some really, just really important points. Make sure even if the person who needs care has a caregiver, make sure their information is available to the next person in line for caregiving. I hate to phrase it like that. It sounds a little bit insensitive. However, and this brings up another point that you made. Alzheimer's disease, and especially if it's early onset, and I don't know all the details around ages and stuff like that, but it can a lot of times take the life of the caregiver before it actually takes the person who's struggling with the disease or with the condition. Also, like, life, despite being a caregiver, you can be a caregiver, you can be a fantastic caregiver, you can have everything under control and everything be perfect, and get into a car accident or have an emergency, like, diagnosis yourself, or again, in your mom's case, have a heart attack. You can, like, something can still happen to family caregivers. So it's so important, like you said, to have all of this documentation and to have a plan set in place, a what if plan. What if I can no longer care for my father? Who's next? What if mom can't do it? What if mom dies first, even though, dad's the one with the chronic illness right now? what if something happens? And a lot of families just don't have that conversation. And I have to be honest with you, this is probably the third, and again, it's mostly related to the work that I do with the podcast, but this is probably the third or fourth time this week that I've had the conversation of what if my plan doesn't go as planned and something goes wrong? And because that's when caregiving happens a lot of times, is when you're just thrown under the rug. You had no experience in caregiving.
Correct. None at all.
You've
My mother
never
had
you've
always,
never taken you've never taken care of anyone before. And now all of a sudden, your mom passes unexpectedly. And now so you have to deal with that grief. And you probably already been dealing with some anticipatory grief with your father with the Alzheimer's. And now all of a sudden you're thrown into this difficult role of caregiving. How did you manage that?
yes. Well, there are two really great things. And again, these are sort of my lessons as well, is where my dad was financially stable and also had a pension from the military. So that allowed us to have some of more luxuries that other people don't have. And the second thing is, I know it's a really tumultuous time for siblings when parents start to ail. But my brother and I were an amazing team, and that he had a financial planning background. And so he was like, I'm finances and legal and you're healthcare. And so it was a really great division of labor. And that's not to say we didn't take on some of the other responsibilities of that person. Of course, my brother would visit my dad in the hospital and things like that. But it was surrounding yourself with a tribe. So that's where we went and sought out the Alzheimer's Association in Colorado. And I am not a support person, need a lot of consultation, want to wallow in it kind of person. I wanted to take action. And so immediately I started volunteering at walks and events where it's more positive and it's more happy. And that really fueled me. But the most important thing about that volunteerism was the fact that I found another tribe of people who were such an amazing support system to me. I got recommendations for geriatricians. I got recommendations for places to live. Now, the Alzheimer's Association is very delicate about how they do that because they don't want to show preference to anyone in their community, but they certainly know how to point you in the right direction. And so we immediately immersed ourselves in what do we do for care? How do we plan for his legacy and his estate? And he done a lot of that already, but we just jumped right into the tactical motions of getting things in order for my dad. He did not want to move out of his house. And so we found ladies to come in and take care of him from an organization called Visiting Angels, which we are forever thankful. But the March after my mom passed away, he fell and broke his hip. And it was a blessing in disguise because he was resisting going into a facility. And it allowed us during that time in his rehab to find him a place and put him in a facility that we felt was good. And he was in independent living for a really long time in a really nice place where he had, a place to get his hair cut and a place to dine. And so my brother and I were feeling really positive about the experience that he was having, even though he had lost his wife and, he was facing this disease. And so again, having the financial resources and planning ahead of time. And that's what he did for my mother. He was thinking he was planning for her care, but financially he planned for himself. That gave my brother and I the luxury to choose the place we wanted and have the doctors we wanted. And also we had caregivers come in on top of the people that were at the facility because we wanted him to have companionship. We would visit him regularly, but it's not enough. You know that. They don't remember that you were there. And so someone needs to constantly be there to hold their hand and talk to them and support them through everything that's happening and everything that they forget. So we, like I said, just jumped into it with gusto and took a really tactical approach about getting things done and doing the checklist, just like our military father had taught us. And it really helped make us feel a little bit more in control around a situation that ultimately we couldn't control.
That's awesome. And I'm so grateful that you mentioned, not everybody has a brother or a brother that they can count on, or or a sibling that they can count on. And you mentioned how grateful you are for that, and also that your father had most of this stuff planned out and your mother had most of this stuff planned out. And again, finances, and there's so many families who are just not in any of those predicaments, never mind just have one in place. But again, reaching out to the Alzheimer's Association and being involved in marches and programs and stuff, even if the organization itself isn't willing to point you in the right direction, there's a good chance that you're going to make a friend at one of those meets, at one of those events, who's going to get it. And I love how you talked about how you're not like a big, like, in your feelings person. Maybe a support group isn't for you, but maybe a 5K or a march, some other type of event is. And I think they have like wine in like wine nights for Alzheimer's patients, caregivers up here, in coffee clubs or whatever up here. I don't know, and it kind of is more a support group aspect, but at least there's wine, or coffee or whatever.
Yes.
Or
Any
whatever.
way you want to get engaged with the Alzheimer's Association specifically. And I know for people who have other diseases, we have a really dear friend who now has ALS, and the ALS Association has been unbelievable in the support of him. Is seek out those nonprofit organizations that can give you additional resources, mostly at no charge, because we're all doing fundraising to support them. And you would be amazed at the kinds of tools, resources, people, consultations, support you can get. The one thing I love about the Alzheimer's Association is this 1-800 number. And people are like, I'm never going to call an 800 number. I said at 2:30 in the morning, when your Alzheimer's patient, spouse, or father is in complete panic about something and you have no one else to call, you can call them, and there is a licensed person on the other end of the line who's prepared to talk you through it and support you. You gotta depend on those kinds of resources in order to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you are on, the person that you're caregiving for. And that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you just said, I'm not the kind of person who's going to call an 800 number. I'm not the kind of person who's going to ask for help. I was not a support group person until I went to one. I was terrified, afraid there were tissue boxes. I'm like, oh, people are going to cry. I don't like this. I don't even like it when I cry. I don't have time to cry. I don't want to feel sorry for anyone else. I don't want to feel sorry for myself. But it wasn't that. It was different. And it was like talking to friends who got it.
Good.
And no matter what situation you're in that gets you to the point where you're like, okay, I need to go, or I need to reach out, or I need to get help, as hard as it is, the minute you do and you hear someone say, I understand, I went through this myself, or, oh my God, I remember when I was going through that and I did this and it didn't work. And someone told me to stand on my head with orange juice, up my nose, and it didn't work. But you know how it is. People are always willing to offer advice to things. I remember when my grandmother had Alzheimer's and when she was struggling, someone told my mom to give her Brazilian nuts and that it would just take care of it. And I was like, you know what, Mom? I was like, she's not allergic to them. If it makes you feel better to give her the Brazilian nuts, go for it. But let's also put actions in place. Let's call home care agencies and see. My mom wasn't a big fan of people coming in and out of her home. My grandmother had an in-law apartment with my mom. My mom kind of didn't love that idea. My mom didn't love the idea of a nursing home. Let's start calling nursing homes and see about waiting lists and see what, her Medicaid and her insurance is going to cover. And, I mean, the Brazilian nuts and standing on your head with orange juice in your nose is all well and great. But what other things can you be doing that you're not? Maybe you're ignoring these important things. And it sounds like your family just took like the most, but I love that because it's so military to take the most logical, tactical, like, I'm going to do this. But meanwhile, while you're doing those approaches, you're like, hey, who else can I talk to?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the inverse is true. Because I've become such an advocate for the association, I wear my purple bracelet everywhere. I talk about it everywhere. Now I am the resource person at work. I have several friends who have had either spouses or parents diagnosed. I'm the first person they call, and I'm thrilled to be that for them. Is that I've learned so much in my journey by advocating and letting everyone know that it's important to me. Now they come to me voluntarily, right? I'm not forcing it on anyone. They know that they have a resource in me, and I have put them in contact with, the consultant who will give them care community recommendations and, put them on volunteer committees with the association so they feel like they're doing something and making a difference. And that ripple effect of being a volunteer and then shouting from the rooftops about it and not trying to hide it. We did did that for a while. My dad, as a military colonel, would never have wanted me to talk to CNN to tell them the disease that he had. And my brother and I had a real come to Jesus discussion about, I don't want to out him to the world. And my brother was like, this is the only way we're going to make a difference. And he doesn't know now. And I know you wouldn't honor his wish that way, but we got to tell everybody we can so that we can make a difference with this disease. And our story in CNN was like raw. And the don't ask, don't tell went right out the window. But again, I got so many people who saw it and who called me and offered support and then had questions about it. And I put them in touch with the association. So again, your advocacy is so important when this happens to you, if you have the, desire in the stomach to do it. I know when you're in the throes of it, sometimes that's a really hard recommendation for people, but typically once your person that you're caregiving for passes, that also fuels the fire and gives you an opportunity, once you are not a caregiver anymore and you've had a time to rest, is then take up the fight if you can, because we need more voices out there. I can give you just one example. Way back when I started doing this, the NIH for the government was only funding Alzheimer's research to the tune of like $350 million. Fast forward 10 years later, with all of our advocacy and everyone who's sort of had it and come forward and been public about it, you think Glenn Campbell and Bruce Willis, the NIH is now funding $3.5 billion worth of research for Alzheimer's. I get goosebumps when I think about the impact we're having just by having loud voices. And so, if you have the patience and the stomach and the desire to do it, turn that loss into something powerful moving forward is really my other sort of message to people, is if you have the time and the will to do it, honor that person by advocating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can go down to your personal preference. Maybe a march or a 5K isn't for you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe answering phone calls for other family members isn't for you either, and that's fine too. Maybe you just want to share your story. Maybe you just want to write it down. There's all kinds of ways to advocate for anybody with any condition, but especially Alzheimer's. And they're really, it's 2023. There should be absolutely no shame and no stigma to this. Actually, it'll be 2024.
In a minute.
It could be 2020. I don't know. So I don't know what year it is anymore. We're recording this in 2023. And there should be no shame and no stigma to Alzheimer's. Everybody has heard of Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. You ask kids. I know several children who have a great grandmother or a great aunt or a grandmother who suffers from Alzheimer's or dementia. Kids know what this disease is. I can tell you, I worked in, long-term care facilities for years. It doesn't matter if you're rich. It doesn't matter if you're poor. It doesn't matter if you have 3 PhDs. It doesn't matter if you didn't graduate high school. It doesn't matter if you can tie your own shoes or not. This is a disease that is vicious and it does not discriminate. It can happen to anybody from any walk of life. Regardless of your race, your religion, your political affiliation, whether you choose to believe in Alzheimer's or not, it can happen to you. Mm-hmm. It does not have to be an immediate death sentence. It does not mean you are going to end up in a nursing home right away with that diagnosis. You can still have a somewhat normal life. You might have to make accommodations along the way. You might have to get support. It doesn't always end in a nursing home for people. A lot of people can stay at home with this disease. A lot of people end up in other forms of long-term care facilities and end up okay. I'm not saying it doesn't end in death, because it almost certainly does. It's a chronic condition, but the outcome nowadays for people with Alzheimer's is so much different. It's so much better. And it's because we talk about it. And the sooner we get that diagnosis, the sooner we can get the supports in place.
And that's the key. That's the key, Sarah, right now, is early detection. Is people never wanted to find out before because there weren't many options. But I'm telling you, with these 2 drugs, Aduhelm and Leqembi, They are built to help people with an early diagnosis to catch it early. And so even me, who never wanted to get tested before because I saw no point, right? I'm eating the Mediterranean diet. I'm doing my crossword puzzles. I'm doing everything they would tell me to do anyway for prevention. But now, if I got it early enough, I could get drugs that would stave it off. I have heard of a gentleman whose PET scan had plaques and tangles. He took it for 18 months. I think it was Aduhelm, and the PET scan was clear. So that's another message to everybody is you're right, remove the stigma and the fear. And now if you find out much earlier, there are options for staving it off and slowing the progression. It's not a cure yet, but it is definitely giving all of us in the community so much hope, especially with all of the early onset that we're seeing nowadays.
Exactly. And there are lifestyle changes and quality of life things that can be done earlier, even like you said, depending on your risk factors, genetic components, lifestyle components, all these things that factor in. There's all kinds of things that can be done to help with prevention, to help prolong a severe outcome. And I've seen instances of Alzheimer's where the progression was very, very slow, where the person just plateaued in early onset state or early stages and was there for maybe 5 to 10 years. And I've seen situations where it progressed faster. I've seen situations where a traumatic event can change and alter the progression of the disease. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. Did the passing of your mom, did that alter your dad's status, like mental status, and how did you manage that?
Gosh, that's a really good question. He was usually angry about things for everything, from the dry cleaner didn't have my stuff on time to, my TV show isn't on. Like things would anger him quickly with Alzheimer's. With my mother's passing, we saw a lot more sadness. So I hadn't thought of it that way, but I guess you could say it altered it. I don't think it sped him along any faster because he was determined to fight it so much. But he became a lot more solemn and not so fiery after she passed, which was really sad to see too, because he's just a fiery kind of personality. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I know that can be a difficult question to answer, especially having to look back on it. And I know also you cared for your father during COVID isolation in 2020. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
I did. Yes, I know you were asking timeline. We think he was diagnosed somewhere around the age of 68. And by the time he was 82, I mean, look at how long this was. He was he had gone from independent living to assisted living to memory care. And he'd probably been in memory care for 4 or 5 years. And so in 2020, he was in a Morningstar facility that we absolutely loved. The ED was amazing and the staff was amazing. And when COVID hit, we were not able to see him or visit him. I think I did actually go a couple of times when they had breathers or protocol changed and we could wear masks and capes and everything, but he was definitely drastically declining. The beauty was that facility never had a COVID outbreak. No one got sick because they were very tight with protocols. They got lucky. And so it wasn't until that October of 2020 when he was really failing and they called us and said, he needs to be on hospice. And I thought, he was just, he was just fine. We were FaceTiming him with the nurse not a week ago, and something happened and it just dropped off. He did not have COVID either, but it just got really severe. And we were able to go in and see him a couple of times because he was on hospice and they were allowing us all masked. But the Wednesday before he passed, we went and saw him, my brother and I. And then on Friday, I got diagnosed with COVID. And I was not able to go back to see. I was feeling sniffly. I didn't want to go into the facility. And so I tested. And I was not able to go back and see him. My brother wasn't either because he had to quarantine because he was near me. They didn't have an outbreak in the facility, which was amazing. But then he passed that Sunday. And so we had seen him Wednesday. I hadn't been able to see him, and he passed away on Sunday, and we could not do anything with the funeral home or the coroner, the facility, or anyone. They took care of all of it for us because I was sick and my brother was quarantined. So it was a really heartbreaking end to a very long journey of the inability to be with him. The only saving grace we had was that we knew he was getting great care. He was on hospice, so he was getting the medicine that he needed. He did not die of COVID. So one thing I want to mention is we put Alzheimer's on his death certificate, which is very important to me because we need to be managing to those statistics. Many people die of pneumonia or something else or complications, but Alzheimer's is the true cause. And so we wanted to make sure that was documented. So we were really in tight conversation with everyone who was finishing it. And then we couldn't hold a ceremony or a funeral for him. We had to have him cremated, which was not part of our religious beliefs, but what were we going to do? And we did not bury him until that was October of 2020 until August of 2021 in a very limited service, still with masks on because of COVID. So we were happy that we got to celebrate his life, but it didn't go the way that we had planned, certainly because COVID got in the way. But we were blessed that A, he didn't get it, B, his caregivers didn't get it, and that we had such a great circle of support around us that they took care of everything for us until we were able to celebrate the end of his life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can't imagine how difficult that must have been to go through at the time, especially, when you're sick yourself and, you're dealing with, oh crap, I'm really sick right now. I don't know how sick you were. I know when I had COVID in 2020, I felt horrible. I was in bed for 21 days. I did not get out of bed. It knocked me on my butt. And I can't imagine. I had grief of, my residents who had passed at the time, but not my own family, thank God, because I don't know if I would have been able to mentally handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So I applaud you for sharing your story and for being able to handle it mentally. And thank you so much for that. Because I know a lot of families went through a similar situation where their loved one died in a facility and they could not get there. And it wasn't of COVID, but still, my grandmother passed in 2021, not of COVID, of complications of Alzheimer's. She stopped swallowing. She stopped being able to swallow.
Yes.
And that was, when I knew she had nothing to drink on I think it was Sunday, she stopped eating. And Tuesday, she stopped being able to drink, even with thickened liquids. And they started changing her meds because she would take her meds and she would just kind of choke, like aspirate on them. That's what they call them in the medical field. But she would choke on her meds basically. And they would have to kind of like suck it out. So she couldn't orally take her medication. She couldn't swallow anymore. And when I knew that they were taking her off all of her meds except for comfort medications on Tuesday, and she could no longer swallow to drink, I knew it wasn't going to be long. And she passed on Friday. And it was again, I was fortunate that I got to be there with her. And even despite COVID protocols, the facility let me help with postmortem care. I had left my job in healthcare to be there with her. So I was in scrubs. Like they'd have got me a name tag if there was a question.
Nice. I mean, that's super special when they make provisions to be able to help, because it's all about dignity at that point. And so I'm happy to hear
and
that.
compassion visits were so important in that time frame, because we knew so many loved ones were dealing with the same trauma that you had to deal with of their loved one passing and nobody being there with them, nobody from their family there with them. But I think it's interesting, like you said, you knew that he had good care. You obviously knew and had time to build a relationship with the staff that was caring for him. So and that's so important. And so many families overlook that, or they look down on, they might degrade some of the nursing staff that's helping care for their loved one. And it's a terrible idea, because those staff members that are in there caring for your loved one, they're there every single day, or they're there 5 days a week, 3 days if they work part-time, 5 days if they work full-time. As a family caregiver, you can't get there 5 days a week. It's very, some can, but it's very difficult. You might not like the staff. You might not you might be better than the staff in your own vision. And I know not you would never think that, but your own vision might be, I'm better than these people. Your family member, your person that they're taking care of every day has developed a relationship with these people and has their own unique relationship. And I can say, as a nurse's aide, I've every single one of my residents I cared about. I had a few that were difficult, but still cared about them. And I can remember being there in these precious moments of them passing with some of my residents in these difficult moments, and comforting them and comforting the families. And I can remember times where family could not make it in time, and so I had to be the person to hold their hand when they passed. And it was a privilege. It was a privilege that they.
I know, but also heart-wrenching work. I cannot imagine having that kind of mental impact on you during the day, and then still living your life and having to go home to your family and all of those things. And on top of everything else, during COVID, those people were putting their lives at risk every day to be in there and take care of them. And that was the overwhelming thing to me. I mean, we had been in a facility before where the turnover was outrageous. And I really sort of pointed at the leadership team. It wasn't their fault. It was just how the place was run. And we had to move him into a different facility. And so we were really careful about how we chose and the types of people and the philosophy of the location. And so that's another thing I always talk to people about, is when you're choosing one, don't just pick it because it's the newest, cleanest, fanciest building with a nice restaurant. Interview the staff and the ED and the head of the floor and all of those people to the extent that they will allow you to do it, because it will put you at ease, in addition to building a rapport and a relationship with them, to your point, which is so important, because they're caring for your loved one, and it's God's work, if you are a believer, that people choose to do that every single day and care for them like they're their families. It really was an amazing facility that he was in, that we were really blessed, because it was the third one we had moved to after a series of sort of trial and error. And so we really sought out a facility that had the right philosophy and caregivers that we had interviewed and talked to, and knew that he was going to be having good care.
And I think that that's really great advice too, is interview the staff. You can always tell when you go into, or at least I can, because again, my background in long-term care, I can't imagine not having that background, but you can tell, I think, when you go into any workplace, the vibe of the employees. Are they happy? Are they genuinely happy? Is it just one that looks happy to be there and everyone else is like, screw this? You know what I mean? If you're walking in to a facility, you can tell, you can just tell the vibe of the people who are there.
Absolutely. I had just as a really small example of that, and it wasn't even the vibe. It was, again, back to the philosophy, is he had a dining room that was locked and it was only open during meal times. And if you wanted a snack, you had to ask for it and sit in your room and wait. Whereas in the facility that he ended up in, they have a coffee bar and he can sidle up to that coffee bar whenever he wants to. And Ray, can I get you a snack? And they would fix him a snack and pour him a cup of coffee. So he felt like he was at home. It was just even that juxtaposition of the way the place was set up and how they managed it, and locked doors versus an open kitchen. And so those are the types of things to look for sure when you're touring a facility.
And I actually agree with you 100% on the snack bar and the coffee bar thing. It's sometimes people don't eat enough lunch, or they don't eat enough dinner. They don't tell you, they're like content, the appetite gets wonky with Alzheimer's. Sometimes they have a couple bites, or the nurse just sees that they haven't taken a bite in 10 minutes and just takes the plate away, when really they hadn't gotten started eating yet. Maybe they weren't hungry yet. Things happen, meals get skipped. Even if a meal gets eaten, there are times I've had dinner and I still wanted a snack later. Like, I think we've all felt that way at least once, yes. Right? Like, perfectly normal things. I used to ask the kitchen in my facility, can we have a couple extra sandwiches? Maybe just like a couple peanut butter and jellies or ham and cheese for later on if someone forgets that they ate and are just hungry.
Yes.
Because a lot of times people be coming out at, 8-9 o'clock. Oh, when's dinner? I'm hungry. I didn't eat. And there would be the argument. And the truth is maybe they're still hungry. They didn't eat that much. whatever, like here's a peanut butter and sandwich. I'm sorry that you missed dinner. You know, maybe you took a nap during dinner time. Let's have a seat and have some peanut butter and jelly. You know, and just that rather than argue with them over
Yes.
over
Yes.
a
Live in their
simple thing like
world.
eating.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have a second sandwich or a late night snack, who cares? Seriously. Like like
Yeah.
who cares if it makes them happy and feel content? They're not going to be coming out saying I didn't eat if there's not that hunger feeling somewhere in their body.
Yeah.
Um so usually a snack bar or kitchen snack somewhere is so important, and I really do love that tip. I also want to say too, interviewing people in the community who have had loved ones or have loved ones in the facility a lot of times, and that's something, again, getting involved in your local Alzheimer's association, involved in your local support group, getting involved in your local whatever. And that's where you're going to meet people who have family in these facilities or have had family in these facilities. And that's where you're going to know, is this place appropriate? Is this place going to be appropriate? What is it like there? Is their mother there because it's their only option? What are the other options? And finding a good facility can be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. And nerve-wracking. And I think too, the other thing we did not have to look for, but for another friend of mine, we're looking for ones that take Medicaid or Medicare. You have to be, even if you don't think they're ever going to be in one, get them on a waiting list, because the facilities that are less expensive are even harder to get into and get a bed and a room. So you've got to be out there looking and thinking about it if you think you have a loved one that might need it even 2 or 3 years from now. It's a process for sure to research them, but there are resources, like you said.
Yep, absolutely. I want to thank you for sharing all that information, and I want to ask you, I know we talked a lot about the Alzheimer's Association and how you got on board. Do you have anything else you'd like to share about them?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what would be relevant to your audience, especially caregivers. But like I said, even with this nonprofit, as with any, find the one that is surrounded the disease or the predicament that you find yourself in, and reach out and call them. Even if you think there's nothing you might need, I'm telling you, there will be something. Just, with the Alzheimer's Association specifically, it's a national organization headquartered out of Chicago, but we each have our own state branches, and they are personalized to what's happening in the community. And so, if you want to go do a walk or a thing like that to fundraise in the name of your loved one, that's amazing. But to your point, there is any number of ways to get involved, and it doesn't have to look like a support group, or if that's what you're looking for, that's great. But sometimes you're right, it's just a bingo night or a wine night or something like that, where you can go get information about what you need. And like I said, anything you do to be involved in that is helping the cause of your loved one. We're making great strides with research, great strides with funding, support for caregivers across the state of Colorado. And so I would encourage anyone to get involved in their local nonprofit that is affiliated with the disease that is plaguing your loved one, because you will reap the rewards in any way you choose to get involved.
Thank you. And every single state has an Alzheimer's Association, correct?
Yes, and some states have multiple, like California, which is so big, it has multiple chapters. And so there should be one in your region, and typically a local office or local representation. What I always say to people is look for the walk, because it's usually a walk or a run or a bike. And even if, for example, in Colorado, we're headquartered in Denver, we have walks in Grand Junction and Colorado Springs. And so that is where you will find the people and the resources that are in your local community supporting it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you sharing your story and sharing that information and just this great advice, because again, a lot of people don't know where to go and how to even start. And what if I don't want a support group, or what if I don't qualify for this aid? Start at your local charity for what condition your person you care for is dealing with. Now I'm getting on to my final two questions. My favorite question to ask all my guests: what is your favorite form of self-care?
Oh, that's a good one. I have many, so I could do a laundry list, but I have an extrovert version and introvert version. The introvert version is a bubble bath and a glass of wine. That is always the go-to. My extrovert version is, I mentioned earlier, is surround yourself with an amazing tribe. My group of friends has rallied around this cause, even though it's not necessarily their cause, because they know it's important to me. And whenever I am needing comfort, care, solace, I pull together 4 or 5 friends and we go out and just do movies or a glass of wine, or they come with me to the Alzheimer's walk as an example. And so being with my tribe is my form of self-care.
I love that. I think that that is amazing. And I have to say, even if you are introverted, you still need a good friend.
So
Um,
true.
Friends are so important to our mental health, our just isolation and affecting family caregivers and how much that affects. So, if you're a family caregiver and you're wondering what a cheap form of self-care is, call your friend, ask them to come over. Even if your house is a mess, say, listen, I'm going through a lot. My house is a mess. Can you come over? You want to bring a bottle of wine, or I have a cup of tea, whatever it is. If it's wine, if it's tea, if it's coffee, if it's whatever, whiskey, I don't care. You do you. But get a friend over. Talk to a friend. I think that and get a circle of friends, whatever you got to do. I think it's so important. Thank you so much for sharing that
Yes.
advice on that self-care tip. That is the probably one of my favorites ever.
Mhm.
So thank you. And then finally, where can my audience go for more information?
Oh, that's a great question. For Alzheimer's specifically, it's super easy, www.alz.org. And usually, if you're in a particular state, you can do /CO for Colorado or whatever the zip code abbreviation is for your state. And that will get you right to your state page, but you can search on alz.org. That is where I point everyone. And then right on alz.org, the 800 number is up in the right upper hand corner if you'd rather talk to someone live than search around on a website to try and find something. And please, I always recommend everyone, there's no question too small or too big for that 1-800 number to handle, from anything from how do I get involved to my loved one is experiencing this, what should I do? So those two resources are fantastic for the Alzheimer's Association.
Awesome, thank you. And if you have the ability to donate, is there a spot on the Alzheimer's Association website to
Yes,
donate? Should they donate just to their state? Or
Yes, there is a big donate button, and you can sort of navigate down toward a walk or the ride or a gala if they have one in their territory that is specific to the state. If you just click the donate button on alz.org, it will go to Chicago to the national organization, but that is where a ton of our advocacy work is being done. And you can actually designate where you'd like it to go, if you only want it to go to research or you only want it to go to caregiving. So you can be specific.
awesome, thank you so much for that information. I was unaware that you can donate specifically to Alzheimer's caregiving. Sometimes I find the research is funded pretty well, but the caregiving part isn't. So thank,
Yes.
thank you for that. I want to thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much again for being here and sharing your story. And just, it got deep for a bit there, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, this is a wonderful thing that you're doing. And I appreciate even just having the outlet to be able to share it, because we don't get to talk about it this deeply that often, where people really care about the story, because it's hard to hear. So thank you for everything you're doing too, and for having me.
And thank you so much. And with that, I'd like to wrap up this week's episode of Caregiver Chronicles. I'd like to thank everyone who's listening, and I ask you to please like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. If you can, we have a spot to donate to buy me a coffee. But if you really want to support us, the best way to do that is to share us with a friend. If the information in the show was helpful to you, if this information in the show would be helpful to someone multiple people please share it. And for more information, you can go to our brand new website, www.stelmachbrownmedia.com. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.